Well, all this nonsense was going on, and Jimmy Carter was not cutting taxes. Jimmy Carter actually wanted to increase taxes. He wanted to cut taxes to the little guy and increase taxes on businessmen, 3 martini lunches, he wanted to get rid of all that kind of thing. He was finally just driven from office by 440 electoral votes. Again, in 1978, the midterm elections, he tried these Keynesian tax cuts, these rebates. Joe Ford tried rebates, and just didn't come through with the right thing. And the next election, he was out of there. And Reagan passed a big tax cut. It's not just that Reagan passed a big tax cut in 1981. There are 2 other things about it. The other thing is that the Federal Reserve pledged that it would keep the price of gold stable. Now, the Federal Reserve drove down the price of gold to $300, but then it said, okay, we're just going to leave it there. The price of gold isn't going to change from $350 an ounce. Once you had Paul Volcker conceding to that, and the supply-siders in Reagan's administration were begging him to do this, once he conceded to that in August 1982, and the Reagan tax cut, which was phased in, Reagan tax cut did not come all at once. The first Reagan tax cut in 1981 was 1.25%. Inflation that year was 11%, so the real tax increase was 9%.
Art Laffer calls that the greatest mistake in the entire Reagan administration.
Okay.
Phasing in the tax cuts.
Phasing in the tax cuts. You know, it's funny. Art Laffer, he was a Ronald Reagan advisor at that time. He was meeting every month with Ronald Reagan's top policy advisors in the cabinet room at the White House, and we have her minutes. And he was saying that same thing in late 1981. He was saying that there's the 5% tax cut in September 1981, there's the 7.5% tax cut in 1982, 7.5 in 83. Accelerate the whole thing right now. They didn't do that. Instead, what they did is they increased taxes in the summer of 1982, and that ends up being a mistake, right? If Reagan had not backloaded those tax cuts, Reaganomics would have cut off that double-dip recession right away, and the 1980s would have been a greater boom than they even were. But once those tax cuts were phased in, with Paul Volcker targeting gold, then you saw a repeat of the 1960s. As the tax cut comes in, there's a 25% tax cut, phased in by 1984. The Federal Reserve's targeting gold. We're only going to increase the money supply if gold goes down. Price stability. 5% growth per year for another 7 years. Again, the same thing. Anytime there's economic growth, the institutions of 1913 have taken a step back. Seriously. George Bush comes into office in 1990. He raises taxes. Do I need to tell you that? The Federal Reserve fools around with the price level. Sluggish, sluggish, sluggish. Bill Clinton comes into office. And we've all heard of the Clinton boom, right? Did not happen in 1993 and 1994, his first 2 years. You know what the stock market did Bill Clinton's first 2 years? It was flat. Economic growth coming out of recession was slow. The historical floor of the stock and bond markets and of economic growth in the United States was Election Day 1994. The historical floor. You know, stock charts always have this like one bottom. That bottom is November, what is the date? 8th, I forget the exact date, 1994, when the Republicans took Congress. The bond market never went lower than that, the stock market never went lower than that. You had the threefold increase in the stock market from 94 to 2000, based on that date. Same thing in the bond market. So it's very clear what happened in the 1990s. The prosperity of the 1990s was predicated on the clear promise of tax cuts which came in the form of the capital gains tax cut of 1997, and the necessity of there being an income tax cut. I mean, I am still amazed that Bill Clinton did not cut taxes in 2000. His vice president is running, President of the United States, the government's running a $230 billion surplus. In what context can you cut taxes if you cannot cut taxes when you're running a $230 billion surplus? That is astounding, because if you cut taxes, of course, we would have avoided the recession of 2001, and Al Gore would be, you know, on Mount Rushmore right now, because we would have had a booming 2000s. The economic growth of the 1990s occurred because after November 1994, it was clear the only thing the United States could do was cut taxes and restrain the Fed. And those two things did in fact occur later on, justifying the economic growth that happened. In the 2000s, let's not kid ourselves. Economic growth was pretty good from March 2003 until late 2007. It was 3.5% per year. And that's when the tax cut happened. It's just the Federal Reserve messed up the monetary policy. Every single episode of economic growth in this country, since the foundation of the Federal Reserve and the income tax, has been associated with the significant withdrawal of those institutions. So, the thought I'd like to leave you with is one of encouragement. I mean, and I said this to Grover Norquist's group in Washington a couple months ago when a bunch of candidates had appeared who were running for office, kind of Tea Party-like candidates. And there always seems to be a little bit of trepidation that, well, I don't know, the liberal historians have all said that the New Deal worked, and isn't the historical record out there that liberalism helps the economy grow? Let me tell you what, I mean, I'm a professional historian, okay? I've read all the archives. I have written the book. The record is absolutely clear. The only way this country has achieved economic growth in the era of macroeconomic management, that is to say the era of the Federal Reserve and the income tax, is to restrict those institutions. That's the only way. So therefore, there should be no fear about going out there and saying, restrict the Fed and the income tax. It's always worked. And when people protest, they're wrong. The comprehensive record of history is that the institutions of 1913 have to take a back seat if American prosperity is to take hold. Thanks.
I got a long question. It's raining outside and we can't go anywhere anytime. I heard what you said, and I would like for you to tell us